series in this new season called Braving the Wilderness, the journey from unknown to unwavering. And I don't know about you, or I don't know what words you think of or what pictures you have when you think of the word wilderness, but for me, the first thing that comes to mind is kind of like this dense, vast, expansive forest. Maybe it's a little bit dreary, maybe it's kind of like wet or damp, and it's just kind of as far as you can see, as far as you can go, just this wooded area. And I don't know if you've ever been into an area like that or ventured into an area like that, like not as part of a trail, not as part of like this like safe campground type of thing, but just kind of wandered into the woods to explore, to, in a sense, get lost, to just kind of see what happens. Maybe you've never done that, but I have. And like a typical boy, decided to do that at a young age. And there was, at the time, it was my brother and I. My brother's about a year younger than I am. And so we had to be probably like 8 or 7 years old. And there was a wooded area not too far from where we were living at the time in eastern Pennsylvania that we decided we wanted to go explore this, like wilderness. We wanted to go through these woods, walk through it, just kind of see what was there, see what was happening, and kind of just find out, like, you know, if we were man enough to make it in and then come out alive. And so so we just kind of went through and, like, you know, again, typical kids. We weren't planning like spend the night there. We weren't planning on running away, anything like crazy like that. It was just a matter of like, let's go into the wilderness. And so as we press forward, you know, like you're wearing shorts, you're unprepared, and so you get like scratches and like scrapes all over the place, pushing through the brush, getting through, and like the further we go in, the more we press into these woods, the more I started to realize and kind of become aware that like I really had no idea where I was going, or what was going on. It was just kind of like, well, let's just go. But at the same time, you know, my brother's younger than me, and so I'm like, all right, I'm going to be like, you know, the guy that knows where we're going and knows what we're doing. And so he's just following me like into these woods. And we're pressing in, we're going further into these woods. And I started to kind of like, you know, not just become aware that I was in the middle of nowhere, but also feel like I was in the middle of nowhere. And like, you know, you have these kind of doubts that are running through your mind, like, should we be here? Should we not? Like, should we turn around? I could tell my brother was getting a little bit like apprehensive about it all, but then just decided like, let's just go. But then at one moment, like everything changed. We kind of came across this tree that had fallen over, and it was like this log just kind of on its side. And on this log, someone had carved like a message into the log. Now, like the message, as far as I recall, wasn't anything like intimidating or scary or threatening even. It was just the realization that like there was the possibility we weren't alone in those woods. Up until that moment, we felt alone. Up until that moment, we thought we were safe because we didn't think anything would come after us. You know, like worst thing that you would stumble upon probably was some sort of spider or snake that would actually try to move away from you versus attack you. And then we see this log that's on its side, and someone had carved something into it, and all of a sudden all these thoughts start racing through my mind. Like, is this person going to attack us? Are they still here? Are they watching us? You know, like that total like movie scene scenario where like the people are like kind of looking around and someone is like running, kind of like Lost. You know, where the others are running around, but like you don't know where they're at or what's happening. And so, you know, in this moment, this feeling of like potentially being watched, of being isolated yet like observed, of feeling fear and a sense of panic because I really don't know the way out. I think I just got to turn around and run. But if I turn around and run, like what if I don't run to the right direction? I actually run to this potential person, you know? And so my brother and I just kind of looked at each other, and we, like, without even saying a word, like, really recognized, like, you know, we should probably try to make our way out of these woods. And so I said, you want to go back? He's like, yeah, let's go back. And we turned around and we booked it as fast as like 8 and 7-year-olds could run, you know, running through the woods. And at the time, again, it probably felt like I was so deep into this thing, but running out of it, like, you know, we probably weren't that far into it. But it was this kind of like mindset of like, we've got to get out of here. Like, we got to do whatever it takes. If my brother trips and falls, see you later. Like, I'll tell our mom, I'll tell our dad that like you're here. Because I'm thinking like, if we die out here, no one's going to come get us. Like, and so we're just like running. And it's all these thoughts that you have as an 8-year-old running through your mind and just kind of trying to press to get out of this wilderness, to get out of these woods. And I don't know if you've ever had a similar experience to that, or I don't know if you've ever like journeyed or ventured into like, you know, this wooded area with fear or apprehension or with worry, but I would guess, or I would venture to say that like a similar metaphor, a similar situation would actually be moving to New York City in a totally different way. You move to this place that's massive, that's expansive, that you have no idea of what's going on or how things work. You get here and you've got to like worry about things financially, like how do I get a job? Does my job cover enough, to pay my bills or to provide for my needs? What about relationships? Where do I meet people? How do I meet this? There's 8.5 million people, but where do I begin? Do I meet him at work? Do I meet him at school? Do I meet him at the bar? Like, do I go to church? Which church do I go to? And then which relationships are worth developing? What are the ones that like are actually going to be beneficial to me? What are the ones that are like, do I even want to have a relationship with this person? And then that doesn't even factor in like the whole headache of apartment hunting and trying to find out like, okay, is this the place I want to live? Like, does it look like it's infested by rats? Because the sign on the front door says "Do not enter," which like literally is 3 apartments down or 3 buildings down. I'm like, oh my God, break your lease. Like, is this place infested? If I'm living on my own, like, can I afford this place? Because I'm going to have to put down 3 times the rent just to get into this place and then pay $150 for a stupid application fee, and they'll turn around and say, no, you didn't get it, and keep my money. Like, if I'm moving with roommates, like, do I like this person? Am I going to enjoy living with this person? Then you're asking me to sign for an entire year. What if things go bad, like, in the first 2 weeks, and I want to get out of this thing? And like you have these kind of like wilderness, like or unknowns that are taking place in your life, where you're kind of forced to move into something that you don't really have the answer. Even if you think you know what you're getting into, you don't know how you're going to come out of it, and you don't know who you'll be when you come out of it. I think all of us can relate to those kind of experiences. We could all get into those kind of situations where we are stepping into an unknown of some kind and having to face or address questions that we don't have answers to. But the wilderness is a little bit deeper than that. It goes further than that. It kind of presses in a little bit more. Because it's not just about the unknowns. It's about feeling unsettled. It's not just, well, I don't have answers to these questions. It's like, no, nothing about this situation that I'm in gives me peace. Nothing about this situation that I'm in makes me feel like I'm right at home. And it's not just about, well, only a little bit longer, only a little bit more time, and things will be okay. It's actually more of a question is, how long will I be in this place? How long will I remain in this season? How long will I feel like I have no friendships? How long will I feel like I have no money or can't afford to pay for this or to cover for this? How long will it be that I'm stuck in this situation, kind of in no man's land, wandering around, hoping that somehow I find my way out of this wilderness? It's not just like this feeling of like, well, things are going to be okay, because the truth is, the reality is, you don't have the answers to those questions, and you don't know the outcomes to those situations or those circumstances. And for the sake of this kind of series, and for the sake of this teaching, to kind of level set, this is the way I define the wilderness. The wilderness of life, not like a wooded area, but like the wilderness of life is this. It's any space or season where you don't know what to do, how you'll get through, or what's on the other side. Any space or season where you don't know what to do, how you'll get through, or what's on the other side. It's when you realize that you have far more questions than you do answers. That is a wilderness season. That is a wilderness experience. And the thing about the wilderness, it's not if, but when. It's not if, but when. Every person at some point or another is going to venture into wilderness, either by your own doing or by someone else's, or you realize that you're in the wilderness long before you ever recognize the way to get out. We all encounter wilderness seasons in life. And the wilderness, with the wilderness comes an overwhelming sense of fear, of despair, of isolation, at times even attack. And it's this sense that like there's nothing you can do to change the circumstance or to change the situation. And it's not just individuals like you or like me who end up experiencing the wilderness. It's actually like organizations and teams and companies. Anytime someone ventures into that space or into that season where they have more questions than answers, they've entered or approached the wilderness. And the truth is, this is the very season that we've stepped into as a church. It's the very season that we're moving forward into as a church. It's the season that we're in, a wilderness season, where we're stepping out and we're stepping forward to try to build something, a picture, a vision of something that we believe in, of something that we desire, of something that we want, but we don't have the answers as to how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, or what it's even going to look like when it happens. We just know this is what we're supposed to do. And in a sense, in a very real sense, in every area that we have need, we're missing what's needed. I mean, that's the basic essence of need, right? Is that you need something you don't have. And in our case, when it comes to planning church or when it comes to building church or launching church, like, we don't have the financial resources needed to launch a church in this city. Like, we just don't. We don't have like the capital like available in some bank account where we could just dispense and say, let's pick up here, let's purchase this, let's get this, let's move into this. That's just not the way it's functioning. That's not the way it's happening. You know, we don't have a location to meet in outside of this space. We don't have like this venue or people ask like, hey, when are you guys, like, where are you guys going to meet? I'm like, I mean, I usually drop a curse word, but I'm like, I don't know. Like, I mean, that's beyond me. Like, I don't have the answer to that. You know, I'm looking, I'm trying, I reach out or whatever, but like, I mean, in the long run, I don't know where we're going to be. I don't know what like a location or locations looks like for Meta Church. I don't have those answers. You know, we don't have the equipment. We don't have the instruments. We don't have the supplies needed to like execute or put on like what we would all think of as like a traditional church service. That's just not like the state that we're in today. And maybe most critically, we don't have like this full-fledged team of like people that are like all gung-ho A-listers, like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do. Like, we have people that are like, yeah, I'm committed to being a part of this, but I have no idea what that even means. And it's just the reality of where we're at, is this season of wilderness, this moment of wilderness, this time frame of wilderness, where we don't know what it's going to look like, where we don't know when we come out of it. And at the end of the day, I mean, if I'm being completely transparent with you guys, it really isn't what I would prefer. It really isn't. Like, I would prefer to have, like, unlimited resources. I mean, I think we all would. But I'm kind of like, God, this one's for you. Like, I'm not trying to buy sneakers or anything. So, like, you know, like, hook us up on this. You know, I would prefer to have that. I would prefer to have, like, you know, this master plan where I could kind of put it up on a screen and say, this is what we're doing. This is what we're, you know, on this date we're going to be doing this, and on this date we're going to be going here, and on this date so-and-so is going to be a part of this, and this is what we're going to execute, and this is what we're going to do. Like, I wish I had some sort of master plan with details of information that I could just share and say, yeah, this is exactly how it's happening. If it were up to me, that's how I would lead. That's what I would lead with. That's where I would lead from. That's what I would desire. That's what I would want in order to move forward with Meta Church, in order to, in a sense, do what God's called us to do, but to launch it in a way that I think would make the most sense. Yet the reality is that we're not there. In fact, in every way, the season in front of us is more daunting than the season behind us. Where we're headed is far more intimidating than where we've come from. And what it's going to require is more than what we have to offer. Yet this is exactly what we're supposed to do. This is in the midst of this wilderness is where we're supposed to step forward, is where we're supposed to move forward. It's where we got to make a decision to take a step to advance, because at the end of the day, there's no going back. And there's no like venturing back to where we came from. Because I don't care if this recording, I'm sure as hell not moving to South Carolina. Like, this is where I'm at. This is where God has called us. This is where it's time to move forward and to go forward, because there's no going back in the wilderness. The wilderness wasn't intended to be a holding place where you just stay and then maybe you come back out the same. God never intended for that. Not the wilderness in your life, or not the wilderness in the season of our church. So what do? That's the question, right? Like, how do you brave the wilderness? How do you like go through this intentionally or deliberately? Like, what do you do and how do you do it? Escaping it. So how do you move forward with confidence? How do you move forward in life when you're facing a wilderness season of your life with expectation that something good will come out of it? How do you move forward with hope and belief that God really does have something greater for you on the other side of this journey that you're on? How do we move forward in a season where we have way more questions? Where, like, not only do we have way more questions, we have a bunch of questions that we don't know are questions yet. And that's the focus of this series. That's the point of even calling it Braving the Wilderness. Is because at the end of the day, we're going to step into it. And so if you're going to step into it regardless, you might as well do it with confidence. You might as well do it with bravery. It's about stepping into the unknowns with an unwavering conviction that what's ahead of you is better than what you've left behind.
Yeah.
That's what braving the wilderness is about. It's not just about surviving in the wilderness, but thriving in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Because so much of life is, well, I just got to survive. I just got to get through this. But listen, God never intended for us to survive. He promised abundance, and he promised blessing, and he promised a life to the full. And so how do you thrive in this season? Because if you're going to be in it, you might as well learn how to make the most of it. And what we'll do as we walk through this series over the course of however many weeks it is, 5 weeks, I think, is kind of what we've lined up. When we walk through this, we're going to follow a time. We're going to focus or learn from a season and a point in history in the nation of Israel where they walked through both a physical and also a spiritual wilderness, where they were released from a point of captivity after spending over 70 years as slaves and moving back to the city of Jerusalem to rebuild God's temple, to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, and moving from slavery to freedom, from a foreign nation back to their homeland, to do something and repair something that was totally destroyed. Now, on paper, that sounds great. Like, oh, wow, that's epic. Good for them. But like, you got to remember, they didn't have what they need. They were slaves who were made free, who were sent back to a land to rebuild something, to do something with stuff and resources and things they didn't have. Not only that, they were sent out to do this in a place they didn't occupy. And that wasn't like today, okay? Like, I know we got walls being talked about. I know we have borders established. We can look on a map and say this country stops here. And we can identify who belongs to what or what belongs to who. But in these days, that wasn't the case. If I saw your land and I wanted it, it was as simple as me fighting for it. And if I won, I won. It was mine. It's exactly why millions of people in the nation of Israel could be plucked out of that area and brought back to Babylon, because a nation stronger than them came and overtook it. And so they had to go back to this place, figure out, was it occupied? Figure out, was it occupied by who? Can we fight them? Can we overcome them? What if it's empty? If we go back and it's empty and someone overtakes us and someone sees us as victims, someone sees us as prey, we don't have any weaponry. We don't have any government or military for protection. And then beyond all that, they had to go and do something that they had no idea how long it would take. The city of Jerusalem was burned to the ground. It was destroyed. It was left desolate. There was nothing there. It was ruins. And so now they've got to go back and rebuild something. They have no idea. They didn't even have walls for protection around their city. And yet they've got to go back to this place and figure out, this is what we're supposed to do. We have no idea how long it's going to take. We have no idea who or what's going to come against us. We have no idea how or what we're going to use to accomplish this. We just know we've stepped into the wilderness, and this is what God has called us to do. They're completely vulnerable, surrounded by fear, surrounded by doubt, surrounded by enemies, surrounded by challenges, yet completely unwavering in their pursuit and in their commitment to move forward. And so week by week, what we'll do is we'll learn from the Israelites as they make their journey back to Jerusalem. We'll look at what's taking place. We'll understand, or we'll read from the inside given in God's word to kind of paint a picture of what's taking place, and then what that means not just for the Israelites, but what that means for us in our personal lives, and what that means for us as a community, and what that means for us as a church. So with that in mind, we'll pick up in the book of Ezra. And Ezra was one of the guys appointed by God to kind of be a leader of sorts and leading the people back to Jerusalem. He was an official in the Babylonian Empire and the Persian Empire at this time. And so Ezra kind of took a written account of all the things that happened as the Israelites were making their way back to Jerusalem. And so this is what Ezra says, the first 5 verses. I'll read them, pretty straightforward. But Ezra writes, "In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord fulfilled the prophecy he had given through Jeremiah. He stirred the heart of Cyrus to put this proclamation in writing and to send it throughout his kingdom. And this is what King Cyrus of Persia said. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has appointed me to build him a temple at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Any of you who are his people may go to Jerusalem and Judah to rebuild this temple of the Lord, the God of Israel who lives in Jerusalem. And may your God be with you. Wherever this Jewish remnant is found, let their neighbors contribute toward their expenses by giving them silver and gold, supplies for the journey, and livestock, as well as a voluntary offering for the temple of God in Jerusalem." And then verse 5 says this, "Then God stirred the hearts of the priests and the Levites and the leaders of the tribes of Judah and of Benjamin to go to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple of the Lord." So Ezra kind of takes a written account of like the very beginning phases of the Israelites stepping into this kind of wilderness season, stepping into this unknown. And though it sounds like, all right, the people were ready for it, the people were ready to go, the truth is it was actually the opposite of that. Though Ezra writes it, it almost sounds like the people were anticipating this day to come. It really actually wasn't this way at all. And the reason we know that is because there was another guy who existed, another guy who lived at this time that God had used to speak a message to the people of Israel, and his name was Haggai. And Haggai was a prophet, and this is how Haggai takes account of what happened or what triggered the people moving back to Jerusalem. Just 3 verses I'll read with you, coming out of Haggai chapter 1, verse 4. And this is the Lord speaking to the Israelites. Why are you living in luxurious houses while my house lies in ruins? And then verse 9 he says, you hoped for rich harvest, but they were poor. And when you brought your harvest home, I blew it away. Why? Because my house lies in ruins, says the Lord of heaven's armies, while all of you are busy building your own fine houses. And then verse 14, this is what it says. So the Lord sparked enthusiasm of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the enthusiasm of Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the enthusiasm of the whole remnant of God's people. They began to work on the house of their God, the Lord of heaven's armies. So what you see is actually, instead of these people being ambitious to go and step into this wilderness, that God had to disrupt something in them. That God had to awaken something in them. That God had to kind of prompt them and position them and almost in a sense address the level of their comfort in order for them to get uncomfortable. In order for them to do what they were set out to do. And God had to bring about a prophet that would speak so directly and charge them in such a way that the verses used or the scriptures used, the best way to describe it, that it was something sparked, like a fire was lit underneath them. And then here's what I believe. I believe if you're ever going to step into the wilderness with bravery and with courage, that you're going to have to learn to get uncomfortable with the comfortable. If you're ever going to step into the wilderness with bravery and with courage, you're going to have to learn to get uncomfortable with the comfortable. Now, we talk a lot about being comfortable with the uncomfortable. You know, it's like a flip of words. Being comfortable in the uncomfortable just says, you know, like things don't happen the way according to plan. Like, I get that. Like, and so I'm just going to kind of be flexible and go with it. But I'm talking about being uncomfortable with the comfortable. I'm talking about the things that you take pride in, the things that make you feel good, the things that make you feel like, I don't want to do anything. I just kind of want to stay and relax and just kind of lounge here in this place. Those are the things that you have to get uncomfortable with. In fact, that's the title of this message or this talk tonight, is getting uncomfortable with the comfortable. If you're going to step into the wilderness, if you're going to brave the wilderness, the first thing you've got to do is get uncomfortable with the comfortable in your life. Because to thrive in the wilderness seasons of life, and to thrive in the wilderness seasons as a church, you know, we have to realize that there's some things like comfort that are going to hold us back from ever moving forward in what we want to do. See, God had marked the Israelites to be his people. They were purposed, they were destined, and they were free to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild his temple. That's what he called them for. That's what he called them to. And yet, though that was their purpose, God's house, his temple, lied in ruins. And though his house lied in ruins, the people were content and satisfied with living in their place of slavery and constructing new homes there. Luxurious houses. And they built these extravagant houses in Babylon, and you got to remember that it wasn't their idea to head back to Jerusalem. Even Ezra said that. Ezra said that God stirred in the heart of the king in King Cyrus's heart. That God had to awaken and disrupt someone who didn't even believe in Yahweh, who didn't even believe in the God of the Israelites. God had to awaken something in him and say, hey, you make a decree, you make a proclamation demanding and dictating that my people go back to the city of Jerusalem to rebuild the temple in my glory and in my honor. So someone who wasn't even a believer, someone who didn't even recognize the God of the Jews, God had to disrupt something in him in order for the people who were purposed to do something to actually step into the wilderness to do it. And it wasn't just that they didn't care about the temple. It's that they found comfort in their place of slavery. And their place of, and in a sense, it wasn't just that they found comfort in their slavery, it's that their slavery became their comfort. And if we're honest, I think that's what happens in our lives. Like we love comfort. And so we kind of pursue this idea of comfort and we chase after comfort, and that's why we don't like the wilderness. We don't like the wilderness because it makes us uncomfortable. The wilderness seasons that you face in life, whether it's job transition, whether it's a relationship ending, a friendship ending, or a new relationship beginning, or a move to a new apartment, or a move to a new city, or just like this place where you feel like, I don't know what's happening in life, I don't have any of the answers. The reason we don't like it is because we're uncertain, and because we're uncertain, we don't feel comfortable. And so we chase after that comfort. We push away against the resistance. We push away against the wilderness. Like we pursue comfort over challenge. And in turn, what we end up doing is chasing after comfort and convenience and sacrifice and purpose and calling. It's not that comfort is evil. I mean, listen, I've already confessed, like for me, it would be great to have all the money we needed, the people we needed, the resources we needed to do what God's called us to do. Like that's what I would prefer. But at the end of the day, I recognize that there's purpose and calling, that any purpose and any calling worth pursuing is going to require that you journey through the wilderness. And we have to sacrifice a level of comfort. We have to be willing to sacrifice a level of comfort, because if we don't, that comfort becomes the trap. And I think the problem in faith and the problem in a lot of Christianity is that comfort has become our idol. That we've kind of embraced this idea, well, that like building church or doing church or doing these things, like I'll follow Jesus as long as it's convenient or as long as it's comfortable. But if it requires any measure of sacrifice, if it requires any sort of faith, if it requires that I don't have the answers, like that's not for me. I'll stop short of chasing that. I'll stop short of moving forward with that. But the dilemma is, again, that there's no purpose and no calling worth pursuing that doesn't require you journey through the wilderness. See, the problem is not the wilderness. The problem is that we misunderstand the wilderness. We misunderstand the wilderness because we misunderstand God. You see, we think that God cares about our comfort in the same way that we do, and he doesn't. Mm-hmm. God will sacrifice our comfort in order to develop our character. Yeah. 10 times out of 10. He will sacrifice our comfort in order to develop our character, because the wilderness has a way of strengthening your character like no other experience can. Whether that's an illness you face, whether that's an illness a loved one is facing, whether that's a grieving process, those are all wilderness seasons. Yeah. And those seasons have a way of developing your character in a way that comfort never could. So God will jeopardize your comfort. He will burn your comfort at the stake in order for you to become the person that he always intended for you to become, because he wants to unlock something in you through the wilderness and release you onto greater things. Yeah. And if you're facing or experiencing a wilderness season in life, then let me pose a question to you, because it might just be, could it be that if you're in a wilderness season, that God has pushed you into the wilderness so that you could let go of those comforts that are holding you back? Because that's exactly what he's doing in my life. That he's pushed me out into this wilderness, that he's set me forward, because if it were up to me, I would hold on to everything that I feel like makes me secure and not let go of those things and sacrifice advancing forward and becoming the man that God wants me to become. See, God will push you into the wilderness so that you can press into your purpose. And he'll do so because he recognizes when we're in the wilderness, we ask questions like, how did I get here? Why am I here? What's going on? How long do I stay here? God, like we wrestle with God because we've got nothing else to wrestle with. God, I feel exposed. I feel like anyone can say whatever they want about me. I feel like my friends are mocking me because I don't do what they do, or I don't earn like they earn, or I don't have what they have. I feel like I'm isolating this. No one understands my plight. Like, God, what is going on? Why am I on earth for? Those are questions of purpose. And I don't know what your wilderness season is. And I don't know what specific purpose God wants to reveal through this wilderness season in your life. But what I do know is this. You're in the grand scheme of things, your purpose is connected to and even dependent upon being and building God's church. Your purpose is connected to and even dependent upon being God's church and building God's church. And part of the wilderness is to strip away these things that we've taken hold of, these things that are deterring us, these things that are preventing us from becoming the people, the type of Jesus followers. If you're a follower of Jesus, that becoming the type of person that God says This is my representative. Because listen, when you said, Jesus, I believe in you, I want heaven, yes, that's what I want. We talked about this a few weeks ago. When you raised your hand and said, yes, I'm going to pray that prayer, or yes, I'm going to believe in Jesus, you signed up to be a part of building his church. It wasn't an accident. You volunteered. You raised your hand for it. And God's word is very clear that your purpose is unlocked through that. That it's connected to it and even dependent upon being and building his church. Just like the Israelites, you were set apart for this. You were chosen by God for this. You were destined for this. And God had to address that level of comfort so that they could set out on their purpose. And once they became uncomfortable with the comfortable, they became willing to brave the wilderness that was before them. They still faced questions. They still had unknowns. But they knew it was time to move. And this is exactly where we're at. This is where we're at as a church. This may be where you're at in your life. You have more questions than you have answers. You have more unknowns than you want to think about. You don't know what's ahead. You don't have what you need. But we do know, we as a church, we do know our purpose. We know our calling. And so we move forward with an unwavering conviction that what's to come is going to be greater than what we're leaving behind. Being uncomfortable in the wilderness is what keeps us from settling in the wilderness. Think about your own life. When you're disoriented, when you feel like there's nothing stable, when you feel like things aren't like secure or things aren't the way they're supposed to be, you don't stay in that place. You move. Sometimes we move backwards. But braving the wilderness is about moving forward. About saying, you know what, I don't like this. I don't like this season of life. I don't like where things are. And you know what? It's time for me to take ground. It's time for me to move forward because this is how God has called me. This is what God is doing through me. This is what God wants to do in me. And if I don't choose to embrace that, if I don't choose to accept that, this is where I'm going to be stuck. So what we lack for in resource, we make up for in vision. A vision of people committed to dropping the pursuit of comfort and chasing after and embracing the unknowns of stepping out and building church with us. A vision of navigating the wildernesses of life with people like you and helping you press on to greater purpose and greater significance, the purpose and the significance that God has destined for you. You know, a vision of a time and a point in the future where Meta Church becomes a place where people from all over the earth experience the transformative power of Jesus Christ. This is the vision that we see. This is the vision that we chase after. This is why we move forward through the wilderness, because we say, you know what? That's worth leaving this behind. And though we don't have these answers, we know that if we take one step forward, if we take it one day at a time, if we do it together, and these are all things we're going to talk about in the upcoming weeks, that we can actually see that come to fruition and take place because we chose to brave the wilderness, not shrink back from it. This is why we move forward. This is why we advance. This is how we brave the wilderness, by getting uncomfortable with the comfortable. It's how you do it in your life. It's how we do it in this season as a church. The question is, are you going to do it? Will you journey forward? Will you join us in the journey forward? I'm not saying make a commitment tonight. I'm saying, will you take that step of saying, you know what, the wilderness is worth it? Because the reward I stand to gain, what's on the other side of this journey, I don't know when I'll get there, but what's on the other side of it is going to be worth, and I would make that trade 1,000 times over. See, I believe God has purpose for each and every person. Not just like in general, but I mean like a very specific purpose connected to revealing himself to the world around you. And I think too many people sacrifice that purpose for the sake of comfort. So you know what? Yeah, that could be true, but I kind of like where I'm at. And there's so much more to be had. There's so much more to be gained. There's so much more to be experienced. So my prayer, my challenge to you tonight is that you would get uncomfortable with the comfort. Look into your life. Ask God, challenge yourself. Where have I allowed myself to get comfortable? Where have I allowed myself to just say, you know what, God, I don't really want that. Like, I get that I'm supposed to, or I get that I should, or I get that it would be good for me, but where I'm at right now is okay. And let God stir something in your heart. Let God stir something in your spirit and awaken you to what's ahead and awaken you to what's to come, because what's to come is better than what you leave behind. And I'll wrap with that.